Why do you think, Mr. Sugarman, you weren't invited to the banking inquiry?
I suggest you direct that question to members of the banking inquiry and the professionals who were hired by the banking inquiry to do the professional work of investigating the crisis. Because I have heard it now from several sources that I was most definitely discussed within the meetings of the banking inquiry, and that my name and that of UniCredit and the breaches of liquidity at UniCredit were mentioned at the banking inquiry meetings on more than one occasion. Yet, I'm only here today. I don't know why.
Did you make any submission to the banking inquiry? Did you send in any articles to them or voluntarily?
Well, the simple answer is no, because by then, Senator David Norris, 5 years earlier, had asked, and this is on the records of Shannon Aaron, Minister Brian Lenihan for an explanation. This is in the records of Shannon Aaron. Surely it's there for all to see, particularly committees of the House. And by then, Joan Burton, who was deputy at the time, before she became minister, had then raised the issue in Dáil Éireann with Brian Lennon once again. So surely, if my issue appears on the records, the publicly available records of Shannon Aaron and Dáil Éireann, that is more than sufficient for committees operating within these houses to access that information.
Did you work with other financial institutions before you took up your position with this bank?
Yes, I worked for German banks in the IFSC.
Here in Dublin?
Yes.
As an economist? Or
as risk manager.
As a risk manager?
Yes.
So you had all the qualifications and
yes,
I
will gladly show you my references.
You had the experience and everything to when you made those recommendations and brought it to the attention of the central bank. You had all the experience and everything to back it up.
By all means. I, at that stage, had several years of experience of risk and compliance with regulations issued by the central bank.
Did you speak to any of your counterparts, we'll say, in any of the other banking institutes, the other banks like AIB, Bank of Ireland, or anything, to say that we have a problem here? Have you any similar problems in your banks?
Sorry, Senator Burke.
Yes.
I was hired for my job because of my reputation.
Yes.
And one of the reasons I'm here today is because I expect this committee to help me reinstate that reputation.
Yes.
I, first and foremost, am a banking professional. I would never discuss the business of the bank I work for with anybody working for any other bank. Having said that, if you look at item 2, which is an article about me written by the Süddeutsche Zeitung in Bavaria, you will see that there is a reference in which it says, although the Irish, and this is on the second page, second paragraph, although the Irish financial regulator audited the bank shortly after his resignation, it did not seem to draw any significant conclusion. A top manager of another international bank in Dublin corroborated Roland Kay's story. I'm Roland in this article. He knows him as, I quote, a scrupulous and very conscientious manager. He later on to say he has seen evidence of the breaches at the banks.
Well, you know the way bankers meet, and we had a situation where one bank was doing bed and breakfast with another bank. You didn't have any inkling that the other banks were having problems with liquidity as well.
I was completely unaware of that until the night of the overnight guarantee a year later, and the only reason for the overnight guarantee is because everybody ran dry of liquidity, which meant everybody had broken the law. And yet there isn't a single risk manager who has stood up and said, in 2008, prior to the guarantee, I followed the same law that Jonathon Sugarman followed and turned up in Dane Street and said, we are in breach and therefore we are running dry.
Because they would be guilty of a crime.
because they would be in Mountjoy together with me for 5 years.
Yeah. Were you surprised at the response that you got from the central bank?
I was astonished on several occasions. To begin with, when I walk in and report a breach of 20%, I expected all hell to break loose. The very letter of the law, which I have enclosed here, issued in 2006, specifically explains what a material, how much can you veer off from the limit we're giving you. And it says 1%. 1% should set alarm bells ringing. I walk in and tell you that I'm at 20%. That means I've breached by 1,900%.
Yeah.
I've reached the limit, and nothing happens. Nothing.
Do you think you were the first person to bring this to the attention of the central bank, or were you the only person to bring it to the attention of the central bank?
To the best of my knowledge, I am, but surely it's the central bank who should answer that question. I wouldn't know of anyone else.
You don't know whether that was brought to their attention at the banking inquiry, or whether they said how they were informed of this at the...
I know for a fact that members of the banking inquiry, the joint Erictus banking inquiry, were informed of my story, were informed of the liquidity breach that was reported to the central bank, were informed of the magnitude of this breach, were informed of the fact that nothing then happened, and yet I was never invited.
It's astonishing.
Well, it is, because it was then in Village magazine that I got to read a quote that said as follows. It refers to the banking inquiry, and it says, and I refer you to Village magazine of December 15, January 16, issue 41, item 11. The cover story says, cover up upon cover up. Whistleblower says key witnesses and evidence omitted from banking inquiry and prepares for a public battle. And I quote, according to sources familiar with the documents, the whistleblower now claims the Joint Committee of Inquiry was, and I quote, grievously incomplete without hearing the evidence from Jonathon Sugarman, a banker who approached the central bank in 2007 about significant breaches of legislation on liquidity ratio reporting by Irish banks, and whose story has been recounted at length in the pages of Village magazine.
Yeah. Well, I know very little about banking other than to have loans or paid back loans or mortgages or whatever. Can you explain to us when you first realised that there was a problem, it was a liquidity problem, how did it come to your attention, or what was the parameters or the alarm bells that
Well, I hope I don't show any disrespect with my answer.
Yeah.
In terms of liquidity, it's basically, Jonathon, how much cash have we got in the till?
Right.
I don't care about whether we own Stephen's Green. I don't care about, we've got 20 Ferraris outside. They are illiquid. Cash is liquid.
Right.
So I need to know at least twice a day, if not every 10 minutes during a crisis, how much cash have we got in the till? And that is my job, to make sure that at all times, according to the regulation of the central bank, which stipulates very clearly, very, very clearly, how to count the cash in the till, I should be able to, at any time of day, to tell my bosses, this is our position.
And when there isn't enough of cash in the till, like most of us probably have overdrafts or whatever, what happens if there isn't enough of cash in the till? Is there a kind of an overdraft or something comes into play that you can get a bailout?
Most definitely, and this is where, and this applies to all banks operating out of the IFSC.
Yes.
We are the children of very wealthy and established continental European banks and American banks. So we know that if, for example, during the day, I say, I'm short 2 billion, 4 billion, you ring up your parents and say, look, mommy, you know, can I have a couple of billion here? I'll give them back to you by 5 o'clock. I'll give them back to you by tomorrow. Okay?
Yeah.
But the most definitive set of accounts is what we do at the close of business at 5 o'clock. At the close of business, when you close business for the day, because every trade done after 5 o'clock counts into the following business day, tell us at that moment in time, did you have enough cash, yes or no? Now, the reason the central bank said you might breach by 1% is because Senator Burke might come into us at 5 to 5 and say, you know that 300 million credit line you gave me, I want 250 of it. Now, it's yours to be had. We must give you 250 million. But having given you that 250 million, we might now be in breach so that I do not have enough cash. So that is why the central bank said, okay, you can breach by 1%, not more. And even then, you have to notify us and your audit committee immediately that this is how close you're sailing to the wind.
I see. So, do you think that the CEO, when you brought it to his attention, that he notified the audit committee as well, or was it you that had to notify the audit committee of the bank? Well,
again, going back to item number 1 and Kathleen Barrington's article about David Norris raising my issue in the Shannon, she states, on the 3rd page, this is the 4th paragraph from the bottom. In another strange twist to the story, the Central European Bank at whose IFSC subsidiary the whistleblower worked, i.e. UniCredit, during the relevant period, has emphatically denied that it is the bank to which Norris was referring in the Shannon. Now, this was written in May of 2010. Which means that in May of 2010, the Sunday Business Post, Kathleen Barrington, contacted UniCredit Milan and said, what have you to say for yourselves? Senator Norris has just told us that you were in repeated breaches. But they emphatically denied that it was them. So how is it possible that 3 years after the events, the parent bank is saying this has nothing to do with me? Because theoretically, we would have told Mummy and Daddy that we got into a bit of trouble over here in Dublin. But not only that, because Jonathon Sugarman notified the regulator, and Brian Lennon, in his response to David Norris, says, we cooperate between all central banks. You would assume that the Central Bank of Ireland would have notified its Italian counterpart, Banca d'Italia, do you know that you have a petulant child in Dublin that doesn't know how to calculate liquidity? And was caught with its pants down. But it's only recently that Mario Draghi, who is currently ECB president, but then the governor of Banca d'Italia, and UniCredit, the biggest Italian bank on his watch, only 3 months ago, he responded to MEP Flanagan and said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And this is in my submission to you today. So how can it be that if everybody did what they were supposed to do, 3 months ago, Mario Draghi is saying, I've never heard of this. And that 3 years later, the bank is emphatically denying to the Sunday Business Post that it is the bank that Norris referred to. How is this possible?
Do you think there's a golden circle between the banks and the central bank?
Well, I think the Anglo tapes make it more than clear that a golden circle would be the polite way of referring to it. Because in the recordings, in the Anglo tapes, there's a clear reference in a conversation between Anglo executives and the central bank to breaches of liquidity. But sure, that's nothing, we just discussed it. Where is the report? This says to be reported immediately. Let us see the public of Ireland, who have now bailed out this bank, let us see that this bank acted in accordance with the same law for which people are being locked up for an absence of a TV license. Let us see that Anglo at least attempted to operate under the terms of the license and on paper notify the central bank that they were in breach. But no, all we have is a phone call, where I'm sure you know where the figures were pulled out of. Or shall I repeat it for the record?
I think you should repeat it. We remember.
Right.
Thanks, Chairman.